Let's talk Prime. And no, not that Prime. Not that Prime. Not that Prime either. Okay, it's Transformers Prime. I haven't seen many of the episodes yet. In fact, I can name the only two I've seen so far, Con Job and Darkness Rising Part 1. Although I do plan to watch the rest of the series, especially since I have loads of time to do so now. But let me talk about the Toyline. When I first heard that the toys were going to be released at the end of the year, at December 1st of 2011, I was excited to get my hands on the Starscream figure. I really liked the mold of it, and it was generally a very interesting figure. But then it became a first edition, and all those awesome figures that I saw never got released here. Or they even had a limited run in Toys R Us, which I honestly never visited at that time, which was a giant kick in the nuts for me. So instead, we got the Robots in Disguise line, which is nothing like the other Robots in Disguise line. By the way, I actually had this Optimus when I was a kid, and I actually still have this Megatron today. Albeit I have him with Galvatron's tail and several pieces are missing and the paint is kind of scratched off, but it's still in a pretty decent condition. Whatever, there are several waves of Transformers Prime, and the very first Transformers Prime figure was obviously within the first wave, and that would be Soundwave. I got him because I like the character. Well, I like the fact that it's a Soundwave character. In fact, the moment I saw him, I identified him as Simon McCreepfuck, because really that's what he is in the show. I noticed that the Japanese version actually has an arms Micron named Zori, which is quite reminiscent of the tentacles of another incarnation of Soundwave that makes him the subject of many hentai-related jokes. Although thankfully this one's less creepy. I personally really like the mold. It's very well articulate, rather nice. I know you can barely see it because, well, I'm not really trying to do a review here because I'm not that kind of person, to be honest. But I do really like this figure, and this definitely gave me a good idea of what the Transformers Prime line was going to be with the Robots in Disguise figures. I mean, if the first edition was so nice and Soundwave was freaking awesome, I think the rest of the figures would be rather nice. The other Transformers included in the first edition included a second mold of Bumblebee, a second mold of Cliffjumper, and Wheeljack, which is nothing like the Wheeljack you know from the past, but aside from the general design. Yeah, I think I should mention this. Deluxe class figures, though still called deluxe on the packaging, are also known as revealers, primarily for their head revealing gimmick. Awesome, isn't it? However, you may think that I only have Soundwave. I actually have Cliffjumper and Wheeljack. I do like Wheeljack, it's a nice figure, and because it has no first edition to compare it to, it's actually a very nicely molded figure, and it's not necessarily a terrible figure in the slightest, to be honest. It's just the fact that they named the character Wheeljack, and he acts nothing like the Wheeljack email. Although, to be fair, I was never that big of a Wheeljack fan to begin with, so... Cliffjumper, on the other hand, he had a first edition mold, and as such, it pales in comparison. The first edition mold looks so much better, especially since instead of getting those awesome hands that convert into blasters, which are what he had in the show, instead we get this hammer. Why? I honestly don't get it. Why does he have a hammer?
Hammer time!
I also don't like the fact that his arms are like giant doors. Like, they're also pretty easy to split too, but I'm not doing a review here. It's a shame too, because the first edition always looks so much better if they have a secondary mold. The only exceptions to this are the Viacon and RC. In fact, I actually went and bought RC off of eBay because of another story. I actually found RC, but it was during a time where I wasn't interested in picking it up, and I thought, maybe I'll get it some other time. Little did I know that I was saying that about one of the rarest figures of the series, as in one per case. Stores restock by buying cases of figures, as there's only one RC for every case they restock on, and most likely around 3 or 4 Bumblebees, considering his popularity. In fact, he's so popular that in some of the stores I went to look for RC in had nothing but Bumblebee! In fact, he's so populous that I did not buy him. In fact, I will not buy him until he's the very last figure I have to pick up, because this is certainly a figure I can say, I'll get him next time because he's everywhere! There was also a thing called the Entertainment Pack, where it was basically deluxes of Optimus and Megatron, as well as small little figures of the three kids from the show. And Megatron, well, he's been fixed up a bit. By that I mean he was given a new toy, a Voyager no less, which helps him put himself more into scale with Starscream, at least from the first edition. Because Starscream got a Voyager from that line as well, and he's taller than Megatron. But the Voyagers this time, much like how the Deluxes were renamed Revealers, the Voyagers, just like the Deluxes, are still called Voyagers on the package, but now they're called Power Risers! Primarily because they have a light-up gimmick. You can sort of see it here, but it's a light-up gimmick, which is basically the prime equivalent of a mech tech weapon. A deluxe mech tech weapon. What I mean by this is that the Deluxes have no actual means of locking into place. You literally have to hold it in order to keep that secondary mode out, otherwise you're stuck with just this first mode and nothing else. The Voyager mech tech weapons, on the other hand, actually have a means of locking into its secondary weapon. You see here, this is Megatron. It basically extends outwards. But if you also notice, there's also a ladder here that you can actually flip off to the side. There we go. And it locks into place. I don't have to worry about doing anything. Although this is actually one of the weaker holds, because the moment I let the thing go, it just flips right back in. Future Waves don't seem to be showing up where I live, or at least figures from Future Waves that I can find. Because if I'm correct, Future Waves only add to the case count instead of just completely replacing the old figures entirely. That's not to say the Future Waves look all that perfect either. Knockout is one of the few cases where I actually care for show accuracy, because the current paint job looks ugh. It's funny that the guy with the worst paint job, in my opinion, and most people's opinions when you actually look him up online, ends up being the guy that had this line in the show.
You painted my paint job! Prepare for surgery!
Yes, the guy that was sensitive about his paint job got the worst paint job. I think that's all I have to say. Before you go on eBay and try and buy the first edition figures, just remember, you better have plenty of cash on you, because you'll rarely find a figure from the first edition less than $40. And that includes deluxes. Oh, and the Robots in Disguise guys are no cheapos on the internet either. Vietcons go for like $60 online. A deluxe Robots in Disguise figure, a superior mold to a first edition, is more expensive? Yeah, definitely something you want to go out to retail to buy. Because retail tends to be a lot cheaper. Especially since this is one of those guys you're supposed to army build. I still wish I could just grab that deluxe Starscream from the first edition off shelves. Constant times I went to Walmart to try and find him, only to find nothing but Dark of the Moon.